The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Well, we're back for another episode of the Unlikely Innovators. Steve and I had the great pleasure of chatting with Gordon McCauley today, who's the president and CEO of adMare BioInnovations. This was a great episode, I think, in terms of understanding, the state of the life sciences and biotech sector, not only in Canada, but across the world. But it was also an opportunity for Steve to use the term hewers of wood and drawers of water, and having actually our guest resonate and say, I've used that in an op-ed. So that was a great moment for me to witness that kind of come together, because it was by happenstance, but so great when those connections happen. Steve?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. I know you're making fun of me slightly, but I will rise to the challenge, and I'll say this. One day my old-timey phrases will be appreciated by those around me, and I think today was a good start. But no, it was great having Gordon on. I think I was going to say something, misty-eyed about the long tradition in Canadian history of medical innovation, starting with Banting and Best. But I think diving right in makes a lot of sense. It was a great episode, I thought.
I agree with you. So I think let's go straight to Gordon. So we're now back, and we're pleased to be joined by Gordon McCauley, who is the president and CEO of adMare BioInnovations. Gordon was appointed to those roles in 2016 after serving on the board for 4 years. He's an accomplished life science investor and executive, and we're really happy to have him join us today. But before we get to Gordon, a little bit more about him. Gordon has served as president and CEO of Viable Health Networks Corporation, a national healthcare service business. Allen Therapeutics, a neuroscience biotechnology company that developed novel therapeutics from preclinical to global phase 3 studies before being sold, and as co-founder partner of NDI Capital, institutionally backed life science investment fund. He's also been a senior executive of several successful healthcare enterprises and a senior advisor to several prominent Canadian political leaders. Gordon earned a BA in political science from McMaster University, one of my alma maters, an MBA with honors from IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland, and holds the ICD-D certification from the Institute of Corporate Directors and the Rodman School of Business at the University of Toronto. And now he is a guest of the Unlikely Innovators. Gordon, welcome to the podcast.
That's got to be the best part of my bio, to be a guest of the podcast, no?
Well, now you can include it in all your future bios, right? So
exactly.
So, we always start with when we have guests on the show about their journey and how they, came to be where they are in their current work. And one of the things that jumped out to Steve and I is, how do you go from studying political science to investing in science and biotech? I think that's probably an interesting way to start the combo. So can you maybe talk about your journey going from one world to the other that you're currently in now?
I like to say that I'm the ironic poster child for science, because the only science in my background is political science. And one of the things that I've discovered is that affords me the privilege of asking really smart people really dumb questions. And one of the things that is fascinating about the business of biotech, the business of life sciences in general, is that you need to be able to distill those really complicated issues down to very straightforward commercial questions. And because I've been able to ask those questions out of necessity, it's kind of helped me get there. Listen, the real story is that as you so kindly know, I started out my career in public policy and public affairs. I then transitioned to business deliberately. There's a small hiccup in the roadblock there, as the politician that I was working for at the time likes to say. He left office because the people got sick of him. It was for health reasons. The people got sick of him, and so I was looking for something to do, and I transitioned into a public affairs role in industry, which is kind of a logical thing. And then I decided I wanted to go into a formal kind of line item business role. And the challenge in doing that, of course, is you got to think of industries where there is a connection between that public policy expertise or knowledge and the business itself. And there's a handful of businesses where that makes a lot of sense, or at least it did a million years ago. And I came to the conclusion that I wanted to do well, but I need to do good. I need to do things that are making the world a better place. I know that sounds kind of idealistic, but frankly, it served me reasonably well and allowed me to work in a bunch of businesses that were trying to do really big things for people. And we always talk in our business, as I've talked about in every business I've been involved with, At the end of the day, it's about somebody's mom or somebody's dad, patients, families, caregivers, and making a difference in their lives. And I find that a really motivating purpose, and it fills me with excitement coming to work every day.
That's great. And I was going to say that I think there's a lot of similarities in our paths. Steve and I are both historians by training, and we primarily work with engineers and technologists in our line of work now. So we are definitely afforded the latitude to ask a lot of those questions that you probably wouldn't get an engineer to ask. But because of, I think the worlds that we live in now, I think we've certainly learned a lot in our journeys. But I think, different perspective allows you, I think, to tackle things differently, and I think adds value to the entire process.
Totally.
Yeah, our engineering team, Gordon, often gives us just enough rope to hang ourselves with, right? When we
but confident that you wouldn't know how to put the rope together, so you're safe.
Yeah, that's right. I had the privilege in my last line of work to work with some biotech companies. I used to work for a group called OCE, Ontario Centers of Excellence, and we had an investment portfolio that sort of focused on med tech and bioinnovations. So I got to see a bit of that, but could you sort of, going back to a political statement, could you sort of give us a state of the union of where the current state of biotech and bioinnovation, where the sector is in Canada right now?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that's fascinating about Canada, and actually why adMare exists, is that we have this extraordinary research enterprise that punches well above its weight on any metric you want to choose. And there are good, objective third-party metrics like the World Intellectual Property Office and others that show that Canada has a much stronger research enterprise than its relative population size would suggest. What we've done a lousy job of historically is translating that extraordinary research enterprise into a sustainable life sciences industry. And so, when you go to those objective measures, the inputs, the research enterprise we punch well above our weight. When you go to the outputs, which is essentially the commercial outcome from it, we punch below our weight. Simple data point, if I can bore you with numbers. The Canadian life sciences enterprise is something like a $78 billion industry, about 0.5% of GDP. The US is like a 700 and some odd billion dollar or multiple of that industry at about 4% of the GDP, 4 and small change, I think. So even the 10x application that we're all so used to doing in Canada doesn't apply. So we have this extraordinary opportunity. The good news is we have all of the requisite parts, right? We've got spectacular universities, research institutes, researchers themselves. We have business people engaged in the space, and we actually have a public policy mandate in the key geographies in the country to actually deliver on it. So it's a really exciting moment in time, in my view, probably more exciting than it has ever been in the history of this business over the course of the last 30 some odd years in Canada. I've been involved in it for 20 some odd. It's a really, really exciting moment right now.
And kind of jumping off that, in terms of exciting things that are happening, what are some of the trends you're seeing, when it comes to biotech and bioinnovation in Canada, that you could share with the listeners that may not necessarily be as familiar with the space as you obviously are?
Let me give you the opportunity to ask that question slightly differently, right? Because Canada is 3% of the global market. So at the end of the day, the question has to be, what's exciting going on in the world where Canada actually has an advantage, right? And because of that extraordinary research enterprise, Canada has some extraordinary advantages. So in genomics, for example, we're amongst the global leaders. In cellular therapies, we're amongst the world leaders. We pretty much invented AI and machine learning and are doing an extraordinary job of applying that to a whole bunch of different healthcare applications. And there are exciting developments in neurology, oncology, other places. Radiotherapeutics, an area where we have a particularly large investment, is a place where Canada has a globally leading infrastructure that we can be exploiting. So there's a lot going on in Canada right now where there are very specific, globally competitive leadership positions that we should be taking advantage of.
Gordon, a question that sort of just occurred to me as we were talking and as I was listening to you speak. Does the nature of the biotech startups that we produce in Canada, is it at all influenced by the single payer system that we're in? Do you see a different flavor emerging in the States and other places where that doesn't exist? Does that play into it at all, or is it based on the sort of the researcher focus that then gets commercialized in the private sector?
So I wouldn't say that it plays into the nature of the businesses that are created in Canada. And I'll come back and talk about that in a second, because again, it has to be globally relevant. Where it provides very unique opportunities is in the clinical research application. So in running clinical trials, which are obviously very sophisticated, very complicated enterprises, when you have a single payer system, or let's be honest, 13 different single payer systems, you can work within those systems very efficiently. And a number of provinces have done really good jobs with their systems to facilitate clinical trials. So that's I think where you tend to see the impact, and it is a unique advantage that not everybody, certainly not the U.S. has. The thing that has changed in the way we create companies in Canada has been it's almost an attitudinal approach that I'm really excited to have been part of, where probably 10, 15 years ago, after the global financial crisis, the whole world was in a tough shape economically, and where you have high risk ventures, capital dried up. So companies and founders learn to do just enough, right? Just to get to a point where you might attract a global pharma partner and then kind of sell it off, or just show some human proof of concept before you have enough clinical data to actually get approved. And that was a necessary thing given the time. What happened, however, is that capital started returning to the space, and we were a little slower than we should have been as a country in changing the kind of companies that we created. What's really exciting now is we're seeing my colleagues, venture capital groups as well, investing in really robust Canadian-based biotech enterprises that are really trying to challenge technology in a way to prove it in a globally relevant way, so that they can take it forward. The best data point of that, I used to say 5 years ago, that the proof of how much opportunity there was relative to the research enterprise is that Canada is the only advanced pharmaceutical market in the world without a research-based anchor company. You know what's cool? That's not the case anymore. Mm-hmm. There are 3 of those companies in Canada today, and there are probably, depending on how you want to count them, 10 or 12 others that absolutely have the potential to be anchor companies in Canada, and that will change, right? I mean, the nature of this business is companies do get bought and sold, but if you develop a cadre of, I don't know what the real number is, 15, 20 putative anchor companies, it starts to become a really robust ecosystem that starts to be sustainable and not self-perpetuating, but you know what I mean. Somebody sells the company, they go back into another technology that they find compelling and try and do the same thing over and over again. And that's where you see the really compelling clusters in the world in Boston or in the Bay Area or in Cambridge in the UK. That's the kind of repetition you get, and it's really exciting to me that we're on that path now.
Well, let me ask what I hope is an interesting question. We have a company.
I'll be the judge of that.
Yeah. Please do judge it. We have a company in Sudbury. They split their time between Sudbury and Toronto, called Flowsonics Medical, and they're a med tech firm that does mass blood flow monitoring in a patch, and they're from a community that's better known for its mining innovation. And it's not an obvious place where you'd see a company like that start up. We have a couple of others. Have you had any success? So you just talked about those really interesting clusters that develop because of that repetition and the anchor clients that they're able to attract, and how that sort of symbiotic relationship works. Have you had any success in finding innovative companies worth investing in that were sort of off the beaten path, that weren't in Toronto, Edmonton, Montreal, Vancouver? Have you had any successes like that?
Well, we actually found one in your neck of the woods called Flowsonics that we're an investor in, and
Sure.
we're a seed investor in, and are really excited about. It's a really good example of a company with a really unique technology that pulls together different parts of expertise, and then there's a certain amount of engineering to that, there's a certain amount of medical device logic to that, there's a certain amount of just pure life sciences research to it, and what they're doing is really interesting, right there. It's a monitoring patch. I mean, it's essentially a monitoring kind of band-aid that helps you understand blood flow in patients that can't typically respond, where the nature of that blood flow is critically important, literally to life or death of those patients. Sepsis patients being a really good example. So I'm kidding. Obviously, Flowsonics is something we're really excited about. Look, we have state the obvious, right? The lion's share of our effort goes into Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, roughly in equal parts. And the truth is, about those kinds of life sciences hubs, you tend to see them around very large research universities or research enterprises. And if you look at the kind of money that comes out of CIHR and similar agencies, it predominantly goes into those three, and then cascades down to a couple of other hubs. One of the things that's really cool about Canada, as you know, many people, historians like you guys, who are smarter than me, have said, it's an experiment with the population laid out in a 100-kilometer ribbon across the U.S. border. So we figured out a long time ago, long before the pandemic taught us to use all of this technology, how to collaborate really effectively across the country. And so it's something that actually distinguishes the Canadian enterprise. So we have investments and relationships in Victoria, in rural parts of Alberta, in Kingston, Ontario. I'm on the board of a really cool company called BioVectra in PEI. It's a very large employer in PEI, 500 and some employees on the island. So there is a lot going on across Canada outside of those core hubs. And again, because Canada was forced by geography and history to figure out how we work together across the country, it's kind of a unique advantage for us to take under our wing.
And I think you've talked about this throughout some of the questions so far, in terms of Canada has, I think, all the parts necessary to have this biotech and bioinnovation, cluster, and be a leader on the global stage. And then, Steve mentioned the example that, Flowsonics came out of Sudbury. Some other examples I could think of, in town, are a company called Verve Technologies, as well as RNA Diagnostics. They're doing some really interesting things. And again, in a city that's not typically known for that type of work. But in terms of like finding those companies in those off the path, locations like Sudbury, we obviously know that I think having those academic institutions and those research hospitals are key. But what are some of the other key pillars to building a successful biotech, startup cluster ecosystem, whether it's in a community or like in a country like Canada? And I know that you've mentioned this already, but just, what would be your takeaways in terms of like, what are the key ingredients that we need to see either locally or nationally?
And what's missing?
Yeah, those are both really important questions. And when I look at our strategy, it's because our vision is Canadian life sciences leading the world, which is absolutely positive and absolutely possible. When we think about how we execute on that vision, our strategy has three parts. We build companies, we build ecosystems, and we build talent. And let me give you a sense of what we mean by each of those, because it's really an answer here to your question. At the end of the day, we build companies typically doing one of two things. We find really compelling technology, science, usually in Canadian academia, wherever it is across the country. And we have a team of folks who go out and meet one-on-one with investigators and research organizations and look for compelling science. and we bring it into our hands in our proprietary labs. We have 50 drug development, commercially trained drug development scientists who then advance it to a point where we can actually create a company out of it, and then we spin out that company. The other thing we do is invest directly, which is what we did in the case of Flowsonics, typically as a seed investor. Pretty sure we're the largest seed investor by a long way in Canadian life sciences. And so when you look at that part of our business, we've done that 27 times. Those companies have attracted $1.4 billion worth of real risk capital. They're worth about $3 billion today, and they employ about 1,000 people. So we know if you do that kind of outreach and think about building investable companies in a robust way that have the potential to grow and scale in Canada, that you can do it very effectively. The second thing you need is an ecosystem. And we think about ecosystems two ways. We think about physical ecosystems, and we think about virtual ones. So a physical ecosystem, we have two facilities in Vancouver. We have 40,000 square feet. In Montreal, we have 200,000 square feet that is designed to be the home for scaling companies. And we have companies in those facilities that range from about 5 employees up to about 150 employees. And I'll tell you, I mean, there's actually good literature on this. You guys have no doubt seen it. There is something in the situational alchemy of having a little company beside a big company, and meeting up at literally meeting up at the coffee machine. There's real value in that. And it also affords us the opportunity to do all of the animation around that, the presentations, the lunch and learns, the different sorts of things that are of interest to those companies to help them grow that they might not otherwise have access to. In terms of virtual ecosystems, we do a whole lot of different engagements with organizations across the country. We also have something called the adMare online community, which is a dedicated digital community to about 2,000 active people in the life sciences in Canada today. And that really brings together everybody very, very effectively. We know the demand there is huge. Our facilities, I'll tell you, we expanded our Montreal facility. It was 150,000 square feet. We added 50,000 square feet, commercially financed, by the way, that was 100% leased before we opened the doors. We know there is a demand for that. And so we'd like to see more of that across the country, and are working with partners across the country to figure out how we do more of that. And then the third piece is the talent, right? I mean, everybody, it doesn't matter if you're at McDonald's or McDonald Detweiler, everybody in the country is having a challenge about finding talent, and it's true around the world. It's particularly true in this industry right now. So we have something we call the adMare Academy, which focuses on providing high value, high impact training to key niches of the life sciences ecosystem. So we have the Executive Institute, which is like a 10-month working MBA for mid-career people. You think about these companies we're creating and these buildings we're filling up. We also need people trained in Canada to actually lead those companies, right? So it all kind of fits together. That has been a spectacular success, and we're just about to announce the 5th annual cohort of 20 participants in that program. 50% men, 50% women, by the way, which has always been an easy in that part of it. So that's important on the leadership front. We have something called the BioInnovation Scientist Program. This is looking at the other end of people's careers, early career people who've graduated with a master's or a PhD, and they're trying to figure out how to apply that expertise in a commercial context. You guys would understand that academic science is dramatically different from commercial science. And there's no judgment to that. They have different objectives. But you need to understand how to apply that expertise in a commercial context. The Canadian Council of Academies did a study 4 years ago, Degrees of Success, it's called. And it looked at the PhD grads in Canada. Only 25% of the PhDs that graduate in Canada work in industry. And here we have an industry that has a demand for something like 30,000 high quality jobs over the course of the next 5 or 6 years. So that's that program. We started it in the very early days of the pandemic, kind of as a beta test, because we had a whole bunch of people sitting at home in front of screens, and we thought here was something that might resonate. It went from nothing to 300 and some odd participants in that program over the course of about a 4 or 5 month period. So it's been a big success. We have postdoc programs, co-op programs as well, and we're also a national partner with something called CASTLE, the Canadian Alliance for Skills Training in Life Sciences, which has brought to Canada the gold standard in biomanufacturing training. So you put all that together. Again, the reason we know that's working, out of the 550 some odd alumni of the adMare Academy, 96% of them work in industry today. So coming back to your question, you need companies, you need robust companies that have the capacity to compete globally, but have roots in Canada where they can grow and scale in Canada. You have to have somewhere for those companies to grow and scale into until they can afford their own commercial relationship. Obviously, they got to pay us, but they can grow where they can command their own relationship. And you have to figure out how you get the people together to populate those companies. You do those three things, you're going to have an extraordinary life sciences ecosystem in this country.
Sounds like a pretty great recipe. Building upon that, I think I'm going to ask this question a couple different ways, and we can sort it out. But Canada has long been sort of seen as, like a resource basket for the rest of the world and for the United States, and that's starting to change. We're no longer seen as, hewers of wood and drawers of water necessarily. So first, I wanted to ask you what you think the global perception of Canada is in this sector in particular, and then do you think all those wonderful things you guys are doing and other groups and other companies and around Canada, do we have what it takes to be a leader in this space around the world long term? So you can attack that however you want.
I actually love the basis of the question because I wrote an op-ed 3-4 years ago, pre-pandemic, so I guess probably closer to 4 years ago now. It's that vortex of time. It's hard to figure out when it actually was. Pre-pandemic, I wrote an op-ed that asked the question: were we going to be the hewers of wood and drawers of water in the modern economy? And we had such extraordinary advantages that it would be a shame if we didn't seize them. And again, one of the things I find so exciting is the public policymakers have responded in a fairly major way. I mean, to give credit where it's due, the government of Canada has invested $200 million in what we do. So I think there is extraordinary potential there. How does the world see Canada? Frankly, they see Canada exactly the way that we hope that they would see us. They see us as a stable, safe, strong rule of law kind of economy where you can do interesting and exciting things. I'm not sure that Canadians appreciate, though, how unique some of our advantages are around AI and ML, for example, globally leading capacity. Around genomics, I chair something called the CGEN, which is Canada's Genomic Enterprise, which is based in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal as well, ironically. And we are absolutely amongst the global leaders in that space. Cell therapies, there are some extraordinary things happening. Back at MAC, frankly, some of our colleagues are building pretty compelling work at the McMaster Innovation Park. And big manufacturing capacity. So I think Canadians, if they had the chance to step in the shoes of those around the world, they would actually be quite surprised by how unique our advantages are and how globally competitive our advantages are. So again, I know I keep coming back to it, but it's just what gives me such great excitement about where we are and the opportunity that we have.
Gordon, I was going to say, I'd like to say that Steve read that op-ed because you both use the same terminology, but I've heard him say hewers of wood and drawers of water many times throughout the years that I knew that that's where he was going to go with it, but that's such a great coincidence. We'll have to find that piece.
Look, you can't have taken more than or less than 2 Canadian history courses and not have used hewers of wood, drawers of water, and some paper sometime.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Steve and I are both focused on Canadian history and natural resource history in Canada. So it's definitely a term that we saw a lot over the years. So it's great that we're able to organically bring that in and it resonated with you. So that's great. That's a podcast win for today. Gordon, you've been so generous with your time, but before we let you go, and we're going to give you a big open-ended question, you can kind of take it in any direction you want. But obviously it's a very exciting time for the sector right now, but future thinking, looking ahead, if you had a crystal ball, like what's next, for either adMare or for the sector as a whole when it comes to life sciences, biotech, like what are you most excited about, coming down the pipe in the next couple of years?
So one of the things that I think is fascinating, almost as a sociologist, maybe not as a history person, one of the things that's fascinating about the pandemic is how effectively it laid bare weaknesses in society and inequalities in society, weaknesses in business plans that were covered up by lots of revenue or cheap capital or other things like that. And there are tons of examples of that. I mean, who would have thought 5 years ago that people with significant investments in commercial real estate would be crying the blues, right? I mean, it was almost a utility kind of reliable investment. In amongst all of that kind of turning the world upside down, one of the other things it taught us is the capacity of science and the capacity, frankly, of Canadian science to lead the world, right? And so if you think about every single vaccine in the world in response to this pandemic has a little bit of Canada in it. A company in Vancouver called Acuitas, right? And that in a classic science way, I mean, Peter Cullis, who is one of the scientific founders of that company and a great pioneer in this space, Peter has been working in that space for 40 years, right? To the point where people were sort of saying, oh, I don't know, Peter, really, do we still have to talk about lipid nanoparticles? Like, and there's lots of, I mean, he's won every prize but the big one, right? Lots of gossip about is that coming? And most recently, the adMare, which is a very exciting harbinger for the future. So it taught us about what we can do, what science can do, and how effectively and how quickly we can work. And now not just in Canada, but around the world. I mean, anybody that has more than 30 seconds knowledge of the vaccine industry knows how bloody hard and long it takes to develop a vaccine. And somehow scientists around the world figure out how to do it in a year. I mean, that's absurd. Again, it's the kind of thing, again, you teleport yourself back 5 years ago, people would have said, you can't do that. It's not even a moonshot worthy theory. It's so absurd. They developed it in a year. So, there are a lot of things, there's a lot of negative about the pandemic. A lot of things we've learned about each other and about society and about humans that aren't pretty attractive, aren't very attractive at all. However, there are a few things I think are really exciting about what it's taught us we can do, and again, from a very Canadian perspective, the capacity that Canada has to respond to those sorts of things, and certainly not worth the price of the pandemic. But if you're going to find something positive to come out of it, that's about as positive as it gets.
Wow, I think what we'll do is leave it there. My gosh, that was such an inspiration, and I don't say this lightly, I guess I'm not being flippant, but that was an inspirational way to leave it, I think, Gordon. And I really do, people listening to this should have optimism, not only for where we're going in the world and, future pandemics, but also, where the state of the bioinnovation sort of economy is in Canada. So again,
well, and they might have optimism for history graduates and poli-sci graduates too. Who knows?
Well, someone's got to do the talking, right, Gordon? Yeah. No, that's great. And again, thanks so much for joining us. Our listeners will look forward to this episode, I'm sure, but it was great having you on today.
Hey, thanks for your time. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Gordon. Well, Steve, I'm not making fun of you because I thought it was a really great reference, and it obviously did land with Gordon.
Gordon liked it.
He loved it. But I was going to say, and I didn't want to use it at the beginning because I wanted to set up our guest properly, was that before you said that, in my mind, I said, he's going to say hewers of wood and jars of water. And I think that's honestly because we probably heard Mark Kuhlberg, one of our professors at Laurentian, probably use that, over the years.
Friend of the show,
Mark Kuhlberg. So again, hewers of wood, jars of water. I knew you were going there. I'm glad you went there, and it paid off.
Well, and you know what? I'll never go there again as a result. I don't like. I was going to say something about the Staples thesis, perhaps. No, that would be inappropriate.
Harold Innis. I think maybe if I could reveal, I feel like oftentimes in the outro you reveal how much of a nerd you are. So, and I feel like I haven't done that enough. Although, like, I'm in an office surrounded by Lego, so I think, if you were to see me,
and it's spilled over into my office. If only the listeners could see, I'm like the offsite venue for Mike's spillover of Lego. So I have Lego across the top of my office as well because his is too full.
It's a problem. But what I was going to say is that I had at some point in my history journey, I had made Harold Innis trading cards, like a baseball player. I had a picture of Harold Innis, the progenitor of the Staples thesis. I had his highlights on the back of books that he had penned. It was,
Sorry, you made this?
I paid money to have these cards made online and then sent to my house, and I don't know where they are now.
There was more than one?
Oh, I think I gave them out to people. So
that takes the cake. But you know what? We should do that again. We should make trading cards of all the guests on our show.
Unlikely Innovators. Yes.
Yeah.
That's actually a good idea. Unlike my idea, which is a bad idea.
But all good ideas start with bad ideas.
I guess maybe, but no, I think just to kind of go back, because again, this wasn't meant to be kind of we lay bare our inner nerds about Harold Innis and the frontier thesis and all these great things that we learned once upon a time. But I think just kind of going back, and you said this at the end, but I think the way that Gordon kind of, I think, put together the state of things in Canada, but I think also a call to action that we have all of the parts and pieces in place at a lot of these communities in like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. But again, I think he also pointed the example that it's happening in other locales off the beaten path, like Sudbury, that again, I think if all of these things are moving together and working together, like Canada can be the global leader. I think his point about how the pandemic has taught us, the things that we can do. And I think his point about how there's a little piece of Canada in all of those vaccines, I think is really great. And I think is inspirational that, again, we can become, that global leader in the fields of life sciences, biotech. So again, I think, he did a great job kind of putting that together for us today.
Yeah. And I think it's, I didn't know the extent to which his company was involved in doing what they're doing, but it sounds like just a really great enterprise, and he really laid bare, sort of the impact they're having. So I'm glad folks like Gordon are out there to sort of squire these companies and researchers towards commercialization and implementation, because I think oftentimes they need it. He said 25% of PhDs don't end up working in industry. That means they're in academia, right? So I think it's certainly not what you're trained to do when you're doing your PhD, to become the next scientific director at a med tech firm, right? So I'm glad that there's places like this that the companies can go to commercialize. Anyway, thanks again, Gordon, for jumping on today, and it was I think a great chat. And we'll see everyone on the next episode of the Unlikely Innovators.
See you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Give us 5 stars. Bye.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel, presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.